Today is March 19th, 2018, and you're listening to Human Factors Cast, episode 82. Today on the show, we're talking about how mind-controlled prosthetics work, we're backing up your brain to the cloud, and more. So hail a flying taxi cab, sit back and relax, because Human Factors Cast starts right now.
Welcome to Human Factors Cast, your weekly podcast for all things human factors, psychology, and design.
You know what? I had a really great intro, but so here's the story, guys. We recorded this the first time. It went off perfect, without a hitch. And then I introduced Blake, and his mic didn't go off. So then we had to do it again. It's okay. It only took us 2 times this time. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Human Factors Cast. I'm your host, Nick Roome, joined today by my good friend and yours. Let's hope his mic is working this time, Mr. Blake Arnsdorff.
Does it work?
There it is. Does. He's there. Yes, we are all good to go now. Okay, we're professionals here. It's all good.
Well, Nick, how are you doing, man? What's going on?
Oh, man, I'm good, Blake. I want to talk. So I see you have like a ton of things. So I'm just gonna say mine, so that way we can get into all of yours. But man, I got to tell you, spoiler culture. We've talked about this on the show before, but I have such a really interesting thing that happened to me that is kind of the opposite of what we've talked about spoiler culture before, right? So in the past, we said spoiler culture, you don't want to be you don't want to ruin an experience by having a twist revealed to you, right? And there's all this sort of stigma about spoiling in public, right, for somebody.
Sure, yeah.
But what if a spoiler could have the opposite reaction? What if you had a show or a piece of media was not even on your radar until you heard a spoiler from the thing that made you want to sit through the whole thing and watch it?
Yeah, that would be super rare for me. I want to know what it was you got spoiled that you ended up watching.
The Good Place. The Good Place.
The Good Place.
So
you found out what happens in the end, and you were like, I have to see how this all progresses. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. Now, listeners, I'm not going to spoil The Good Place for you. But if you're curious, send me a direct message in our Slack, and I will send you what the spoiler is that made me want to watch this entire thing. And boy, am I glad I did it. Okay, so again, I'm not going to spoil it for you. Come and find me if you want the spoiler. So I was listening to Tested's podcast with Adam Savage, and they were talking about The Good Place, and they revealed the spoiler that happens at the end of season 1. And I was sitting there going, that's interesting. Okay, and if you're not familiar, the premise of The Good Place is that these people are sent. It's like the afterlife, right? They're sent to the good place and the bad place and all that stuff, right? It's heaven and hell, right? Metaphorically, it stars Ted Danson and Kristen Bell. And fun fact: I have been within 50 feet of Kristen Bell on the set of Veronica Mars.
There you go.
Who knew? But yeah, so the premise is that Kristen Bell goes to the good place, and she is not a good person, and she's trying to figure out why she got sent to the good place. And that's all I'm going to say. It's a great show, fantastic show, and I wouldn't have searched it out unless I knew about the spoiler. And let me just lay it out for you, Blake. I heard this last week right after the podcast that we record, and all last week I binged season 1, and I'm 1 episode away from finishing season 2 because it was that good.
Okay, well, you're like the second person to tell me about The Good Place, and if you're giving it that good of a recommendation knowing the end of season 1 or the spoiler or the twist, then I definitely want to watch it, so I'll have to check it out.
Maybe you can message me and I can tell you. I don't know. If you're intrinsically motivated to go watch it, then do it. I turned a couple people onto it last week, and they've been enjoying it thoroughly. It is a really good show. It's written by some of the same people that did The Office, Parks and Rec. It kind of has, Michael Schur. So if you're familiar with The Office, it's Moe's. So it's got this really campy kind of humor to it, but it's really funny. It's a really funny show. Highly recommend. So there's my shout out for the day. But Blake, I gotta ask you, what's going on with you, man? You got a couple things here for banter.
Yeah, so I've been playing around with a bunch of different ways of recording my podcast, and one that somebody recommended to me was using the Anchor app. And I just have to say, like, if anybody is out there and they like think they want to start a podcast, or they don't really know what it's like or have any of the equipment. And first off, I'm not sponsored by anybody, but this was like a whim thing. But it makes putting together like your intro, your story, and your outro the simple as like clicks of buttons. It is the easiest app I've ever used for podcasting, because I've been trying to make sure, like, every time I want to do something or put out content that is like podcast form, that I just do it as quickly as I can, because I often forget. So if anybody else is out there looking to try something, it's just a good way to go.
Really quick here, Blake, while you're talking about your podcast, why don't you go ahead and plug it, because you're a central part of this show, and if people like you and your personality, I think it's fair game for them to search you out and get a taste of what this podcast is all about.
Oh, sure. I do a podcast on Fridays called the UX Rant, and it's centered around user experience, things that happen in design or research during the week. It's just a way to blow off some steam from a long week of working.
All right. Yeah, go check Blake out. What platforms is that available on?
It's on SoundCloud, and it should be on iTunes at the end of the week.
Perfect. Well, go check out Blake at the UX Rant podcast. You got a couple other things here. What is streaming zombies? What is that?
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so I've been trying to stream more games because I just haven't had time to play any, and it's just one of the things I wanted to try and knock off in 2018, be more consistent with streaming games. But, it was funny. I got stuck trying to stream a specific game and couldn't actually do it. But thanks to the nice UI that's built into Xbox, I was able to figure out how to live stream from just only using the Xbox, because my laptop was giving me so much trouble, and it's something I had never tried before. Have you use PS4, right, Nick?
I do. Quick note on the UI. I posted something in our Slack earlier this week that was called "Crappy User Interface Design," and it was a video by this guy who covers video games. And he kind of has that sarcastic bluntness about bad UIs and interface, and like he breaks it down. It's hysterical. I strongly recommend anyone to go check that out. I had to share it with everybody. But yeah, I use the PlayStation 4. It's pretty easy to stream. Just a couple clicks and you're in. And it once you've hooked it up to your YouTube or Twitch or whatever, it just goes.
Yeah, and I think that what Xbox did is they copied the PlayStation model, because you have some built-in, app service that you can use to actually stream from.
So it's built in right into the UI, right? You literally press I have it set up so where I can double tap the share button or whatever, and it'll start streaming.
Yeah, so they've finally done the exact same thing to follow up on that. So it was cool that I, again, thought I wasn't going to be able to do something similar to using the Anchor app, right? Like just trying to do stuff on the fly, but was able to pull it off and was really easy to set up and use. So again, if you're looking to stream and you're on Xbox, just check out some of the streaming tips from just straight up on your Xbox. But Nick, the only other thing I really want to talk about is you and I got started beefing about what's going on with Annihilation. Did you see it this weekend?
I did not see it this weekend. I saw it 2 weekends ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So okay. Before we started the show, I was like, "Oh, you put Annihilation on here. I'm curious to get your thoughts." And you said,
"I hated it."
And I said, "Oh man, I can't wait! Can't wait to get into the show to talk about this." Which is why I nailed the intro twice. All right. So break it down. Why did you not like Annihilation? Well, let's just break it down. This isn't Human Factors. Who cares? It's a little pop culture-y, and we can. We're personalities now, right? We can talk about this. I think we've earned it. All right, Blake.
It is the brief banter section that keeps getting longer, right?
Right.
But okay. So my real only gripe with it, and to keep in line with Nick's talk about spoiler culture, I'm not going to really give away anything at all. But if you're a fan of the Southern Reach trilogy book series and you went and saw Annihilation, you're probably confused about why lots of major plot points were not the same at all. Like, they didn't line up to what was going on in the story. There was some strangeness in how they portrayed some of the characters. And then there just seemed like a lot of odd additions with some of the creatures they added versus the ones they didn't show. So it felt really inconsistent to me, and it was one of these times that I wished that actually my girlfriend Elise hadn't read the book, or I had gone with somebody who hadn't read it, so that I wouldn't have had as biased of an experience.
Well, good news is that I did not read the book, and so
Yeah.
maybe that's why I enjoyed 80% of the movie. I will say the last 20 minutes or so were a little. What's the word I'm looking for? It didn't live up to the rest of the movie for me, but I thought the rest of the movie, the 80% that came before that, was doing a fantastic job of world building. It does a fantastic job of establishing the rules of this environment, and it stuck to those rules, right? Like, there was no time where it deviated. It set those rules up, and if you go back and sort of think about the things that were happening early on in the film, everything followed those rules, and that is very important to me, because when a movie breaks the rules that it itself set up, that's when I can't suspend disbelief, right? And so it to me, it was a very strong storytelling, very strong world building. Now, of course, I have my own gripes with it, but I'm curious as to like what aspects, like you already kind of mentioned that some of the story beats weren't the same, and you're comparing to the book, right? And I'm sure we'll have this conversation again in a month when after I've seen Ready Player One, like I'm sure reading the book and then seeing the thing on film is going to be a complete different thing, so I don't know. I enjoyed it, like I said, up until that last 20 minutes, but it was because of the world building and it was because of the rules they followed.
I mean, the cinematography and sound design were amazing in it, and I also had that expectation going into it that they were going to be great, but the story and the world building to me just was not as good or consistent as what I had read in the series of books, so it didn't match up to my preconceived expectations, right? Only because I had read it. And so that I'm glad that you enjoyed it more for the storyline and its world building, because there was so much that was missing that was pivotal to the actual storyline when you look at the book versus what they actually put in the film. And then they mixed up a couple of things. But anyway, I mean, it's kind of funny to contrast how somebody who didn't read it enjoyed it versus like somebody who did. And I've never been one of those people that actually, like for Ready Player One, I won't have read the book when it comes out, and so I'll probably go see it without reading the book.
So this conversation will be completely flip-flopped. I'll be like, oh man, they left so many good things out of the book, and
likely.
I mean, to be fair, I was pretty lukewarm on the book, but that's another conversation. Do we want to get into some of these events and plug these?
Yeah, so I just want to plug real quick. Next week, I will be at the Human Factors Healthcare Symposium. So that's March 26th to the 28th in Boston. So if you guys are around, or if there's something you want to see, please let me know in Slack. And I am happy to either meet up with you and hang out at the conference if you're there, or try and attend sessions for you.
Yeah, in addition to that, we're going to try to do some live streams or at least some bonus episodes for you guys. So that way you guys can kind of get that conference experience without actually going to the conference. Not that you shouldn't go. You should absolutely go. But we adopt a no human factors practitioner left behind model here, where we want to make sure we send people out and are reporting on these important conferences that, have this information that you want to know, right? But I mean, still go for the networking. That's the bottom line. In addition to that, next month, about a month from when Blake's going to this healthcare symposium, we have Woodrow is going up to the CHI conference in Montreal, Computer Human Interaction, and that's from the 23rd to the 26th. Again, reach out to him in Slack if you have any specifics. And HFES Australia is coming to Perth, 26th through 28th in November, and we have actual HFES. That sounds really bad. No, we have HFES International. Sorry, HFES International here in Philly, and that is at the end of September. And I just got the okay to go to that. We're working on Blake to get to go to that. We hoping to be there live and to do a couple actual live shows from the hotel lobby, so you guys can come meet up with us while we're actually doing the show. So why don't you say we get into the news? What do you think?
Let's do it.
All right. So this is the part of the show all about human factors news. It's where we break down everything related to the field of human factors. This could be medical, transportation, psychology, autonomy, whatever it is. As long as it relates to the field of human factors, it is fair game. Blake, what do we got up first this week?
All right. So since October, mysterious flying objects have been moving and seen around the skies of the South Island of New Zealand. And what they look like is a cross between a plane and a small drone with a series of small rotor blades along each wing that allow it to take off like a helicopter and then fly like a plane. And to those on the ground, it always has been unclear whether there's a pilot on board. Well, as it actually turns out, the airborne vehicle has been part of a series of stealth flight tests by a financed personally by Larry Page, aka the co-founder of Google. The company known as Kitty Hawk has been testing a new kind of fully electric, self-piloted flying taxis. And imagine starting a network of autonomous air taxis as Uber is planning to, but long before Uber can actually do it in the States. And that's exactly what Mr. Page and Kitty Hawk are trying to do. Nick, I was really surprised that it was actually somebody who had started Google that was, I guess, competing in New Zealand with the likes of Uber, like trying to do flight tests out there. That's really cool.
Yeah, why they're doing it in New Zealand, I'm not sure. Probably because of laws and legislation regarding testing of these things, right?
Yeah, because it seemed like it was a lot simpler in New Zealand, or at least they had some sort of deal that made it easier for them to, one, test, but also then get them commercially flying.
Right. Yeah, no, this is pretty cool that we have some working stuff, right? I mean, I can't remember. Was it last year that I had on my predictions that we'd see some of these first tests?
Yeah.
But it just blows my mind that, someday soon we'll be able to jump into a personal helicopter that'll take us from point A to point B.
Yeah, the design of this thing is really intense. Like the way they describe it is perfect. I mean, it does look like a very small airplane / drone with a bunch of like rotocopter blades on the wings. But the thing that I was curious about is for these test flights, I mean, I wonder if they were picking up people or not, because there's not a whole lot of course, it's a stealth test, right? And I'm sure it's more about testing the autonomous vehicle than anything else. But I wonder if they're going to start just doing like, kind of beta taxi runs for this as well.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. So to describe the design of this thing, you already kind of hinted at it, but yeah, it's a VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and it looks like a normal aircraft, just has like drone propellers on its wings that provide the vertical takeoff and landing lift. Now, what this means for the future, I have no idea, but they're saying that they have the ambitious target of being net carbon zero by 2050. So they obviously have some stretch goals in place to make this happen. And I didn't see anything about when they plan to make this available to the public, or when they're planning on making humans being able to ride this thing. Wow, words are hard today.
Well, actually, it looks like based on some of the laws in New Zealand about getting commercial flights like this going, they're hoping to do this within as little as 3 years, like having a network of these flying taxis in New Zealand. Which is really, really awesome to hear, because, I mean, the bigger part of the article talks about the big challenges in the U.S. with the FAA trying to figure out how, one, you can test vehicles, but then the second part of that is once you test them, how do you go about certifying so they can fly commercially? And right now, in the United States, we really don't have that kind of golden path that you can take. So you've got companies like Uber and Airbus that are trying to at least get testing done, but there's really nothing past that. So I think maybe it'll help by seeing this happen in New Zealand quicker over time, with seeing how testing goes and how actually deployment goes. Maybe that'll help the FAA and the US kind of catch up or have a good idea of what's a good way forward. But again, we do have some of the most, heavily air traffic density skies. Plus we have one of the lowest rates of, error when it comes to air traffic. So, I mean, there's a lot to kind of, run through when it comes to getting these things in the air.
For sure. And it's important to note that, New Zealand isn't the first country to have this happen. I mean, we've seen tests in Dubai, I think even earlier this year or late last year, where they are actually trying these same types of what are these, like, small aircraft that are intended for personal use or for these ride-sharing purposes being tested in Dubai. And so the more, to me, the more places that try this out, the better, because then we have more data and we can then say, hey, look, it worked over here. These are the laws that were in place there. Let's maybe try it out here.
Definitely. I think one of the biggest hurdles is going to be trying to make people feel like it's a safe thing to do. Because I feel like as Uber's kind of grown and Lyft's kind of grown within the States, as that becomes more automated. I mean, there was a time period where people had to get used to the idea of just hailing a ride from an app for somebody you don't know that wasn't necessarily like licensed as a professional for taxis or being like in a taxi service. But this now takes it to a whole nother realm. Like, how do you make people comfortable, not just with like autonomous cars, but autonomous, flight vehicles as well? So I think that's going to be a giant hurdle once we get past the testing and getting into the like commercialization of these kinds of vehicles.
You know what? And it's funny that you bring that stuff up, because the trust in these services like Uber and Lyft, and even trust in autonomous vehicles, I feel like has made a lot of really big strides in the last couple of years, and I think our next story may, unfortunately, set autonomy back a little bit. So let's get into it.
Yeah, especially in the U.S., I definitely think you're right. So Uber Technologies has had to halt their autonomous vehicle test after one of its cars crashed and struck and killed a woman in Tempe, Arizona, in what was likely the first pedestrian fatality involving this kind of autonomous technology. So the woman was crossing the road outside of a crosswalk when the Uber vehicle operating in autonomous mode under the supervision of a safety human driver struck her, according to the Tempe Police Department. Companies like Alphabet Incorporated, General Motors, Uber, and Baidu are investing billions of dollars to develop autonomous vehicle technology because it has the potential to transform the auto industry and transportation in general and the way that cities work throughout the world. But one analyst has estimated that Alphabet's Waymo unit is worth at least $70 billion. So the fatality in Tempe could slow the testing and delay commercialization and undermine such optimism. And Nick, I think you're right. I mean, when you see something like this that results in a fatality, especially when we're talking about a pedestrian now, because we've talked about a fatality before related to a crash where
Tesla's autopilot.
Tesla was involved, but it wasn't so much on the automation side, right? It was like there was determined fault, but I really think this will set things very far back. But at the same time, I don't really know the best PC way to say this. I mean, these kind of tests have to be run because you don't want these things to keep happening. And this obviously reveals a giant flaw in one, depending on like how an operator gets back in the loop here, because there was like a human safety driver there. That's obviously a problem. And as well as it mentions in the article, and again, this is one article, one point of view, that the pedestrian was walking outside of the crosswalk. Well, that means then potentially the vehicle couldn't spot her because it didn't have the right, algorithm, or didn't have the right things to be using its cameras for, or trying to look out for. Maybe it's only looking for road map markings.
Yeah, and I mean, it's, oh God, yeah. So I just looked at the name of the person that was struck, which is good because I saw the 49-year-old woman, and it's in Tempe, Arizona, and my partner's mother lives around that area. So I was like, oh no. But I mean, it is a really unfortunate consequence of having to test this technology, right? But I mean, part of the problem is too that this is a really important case study for complacency behind the wheel, especially in these autonomous systems, because like the article points out, there was a safety driver inside, and the safety driver missed this. The safety driver was probably on their phone and not being in the... I don't want to like call this person out or anything, but I can imagine where it wouldn't be difficult to imagine a world where the driver was on their phone, distracted from what's going on around them, and they couldn't intervene soon enough because They weren't in the loop with what was happening. And
or I mean, we can legitimize them in some regard here. I mean, potentially they have to do tasks while they're in the car that require them to either, interact with a tablet or make specific, markers while they're driving. So that could have been inhibiting it too.
yeah, that's fair. But I mean, it will be really interesting how this all shapes out. Like, what was the driver doing to the point where they weren't able to intervene quick enough? Was it just they didn't notice until it was too late? Well, what were they doing leading up until that point? What are the kind of factors that would sort of improve this later down the line, right? And we have companies like Google who want to go fully autonomous, no sort of controls within the vehicle, to where the driver couldn't even save this person if they wanted to, even if they saw them coming. It just raises a bunch of really serious issues that come with automation. And, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but I feel like this is going to do a lot of damage for trust in automation, right? That's a big topic in human factors right now, is how do we get not only operators, but people interacting with autonomous systems, being pedestrians on the street, trusting autonomous vehicles, right? I mean, I'd be really curious to see what this. I know this sounds really morbid, but like to see what the last seconds of this person's life were thinking. Like, oh, this person sees me, it's fine, I can just cross here. Or were they on their phone looking down and not paying attention because they thought the automated system was not going to run them over? Or there's a lot of issues that we can break down about this and dive into, and I'm absolutely positive that we will have like 10 different follow-up stories of this over the next couple months, where we will find out more information about what happened. We'll find out exactly what in the algorithm determined that the pedestrian wasn't, in fact, an object that the car needed to avoid. We'll find out what the pedestrian was doing at the time. We'll find out what the operator of the vehicle was doing at the time. We'll find out all these details, and that will inform not only the automation going forward, but also potentially laws and regulation around this type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, all of those are really great points, Nick. And the legislation thing is something you and I've hit on for the last couple of years. And it's just, I don't even know how they're going to handle this because this was in testing phase. So that's just a whole nother can of worms to open. And you make a really interesting point about what if, and this is all what if, this is very much speculation, but it's a great point that Nick brings up. I mean, typically when you cross the street, if there's a car coming, you make like eye contact with the car or whoever's driving. And if you did look up and see that somebody was in the car, and especially if they were in the driver's seat, but even if you just glanced up, saw somebody in the car, you may assume that, oh, okay, I can walk across the street. They have to be able to see me. Well, what are we going to do about that mental model now? Because now, even if you looked up and there was somebody in the front seat, say they just weren't driving, but you saw a person, how do you know that it's safe to cross the street? How do you determine if it's an autonomous vehicle? And then I guess my last point is this is super unfortunate for, of course, the fatality reasons, but when this stuff happens, when it happens in aviation, when it happens in nautical vehicles, this is just like you see grand steps being taken forward in autonomous vehicles, but this is going to send it back very far in the way that people are going to accept it or trust it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if I could, I would nominate this person to be one of the first people to try out this next article that we're going to talk about, because this thing is insane. I want to jump into this. I hate to just leave that one there, but I want to jump into this next story because this has huge implications and a lot of ethical implications as well.
A lot of weird implications from this one. But all right, so the well-known startup accelerator Y Combinator is known for supporting audacious companies in its popular 3-month boot camp, but Nectome is truly one of a kind. So Nectome's technology allows for you to back up your mind using a high-tech embalming process. The idea being that someday in the future, scientists will scan your preserved brain and turn it into a computer simulation. That way, someone a lot like you, though not exactly you, will smell the flowers again in a data server somewhere. And there's a slight exorbitantly high cost for using Nectome service, and that is that your brain actually has to be fresh, meaning, as the founder put it, the product is 100% fatal for all humans. So Nick and I had, funny enough, like he had posted it in the general thread to talk about it, and I had posted this in the random one because when I saw the picture of the brain and that it was from Y Combinator, I had to take a look. And I'm so glad we're talking about this because it's somewhere between sci-fi and what in the world is going on. Because there is some kind of implication for what this kind of technology will do in the next, 10, 20 years. I have no idea.
Yeah, so the implication is obviously that we are, as a society, getting more and more comfortable with being quote-unquote immortal. And this is one step closer to that, right? Now, I think we actually had a discussion about this in our public facing Slack where we were, I don't know how I feel about this. It's not really me because it's a simulation of me rather than it's a copy. It's not, it's not me. It's not my brain, right? But I was saying that if they could hook up electrodes into my existing brain and then somehow power that, and I was hooked into a data server somewhere, manipulating my actual brain with that, then it's me, right? But this copy is not, and so for someone, I forget. I need to pull this up. I'm pulling this up right now, but because I want to attribute correctly, because there's a lot of conversation about this. This will be a good time to plug our Slack. Our link is in the show notes. It's on our website, on our Twitter, pretty much anywhere you can find us. You can find our Slack. I'm loading this guy up right now. But yeah, this has a lot of implications for how are we as a society going to preserve ourselves going forward in the future? And I don't know, Blake, what do you think about this?
This is like too much metaphysics for me to even handle because when I was in grad school, I had a particular psychology professor that was very much into philosophy, and he used to always bring up the problem or the thought experiment that what if you're nothing but a brain in a vat that somebody is giving electrical signals to? Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you're almost paying to be that, whether you are one right now or not. And I just thought that was kind of insane. But at the same time, the tie-in that they bring in of this being the next kind of like physician-assisted suicide type of thing is very interesting to me. Because what if you're in your last dying days where your brain is still quote-unquote fresh, and that's a decision you make? What if down the line, who knows how long, they can create some kind of simulation where you are able to resume existence, but it, like they say, it's not necessarily you, and there's a lot of biological problems that come up here, like can you actually find the memories within the brain tissues? I mean, that's a valid point they bring up in the article, but I think it's a sign of where things will go by the time that I'm an old man, and that'll be something like my kids are dealing with is, how do I want to live my life? Do I want to live it as a brain in a simulation where I am always immortal, or do I want to live this flesh life? I don't know. It's really intense to me.
It really is. So provided a choice, cremation, buried, or this, I would choose this if the cost wasn't so high. If the cost was not literally, I'm choosing to end my life right now to preserve my brain for later.
Plus $10,000.
Plus $10,000. I mean, that's
just throw that out there.
I mean, compared to the cost of a life, that's whatever. But so like, I'm really struggling with this, man. Like, so Matteo brought this thing up, that it's more of it's recreating a mind. It's not useful for the physical person, right? It's more of a saving people's knowledge, but he's arguing that we need to actually save the people attached to that knowledge, right? So like, we just saw the passing of Stephen Hawking this last week. If he were to elect for this service, his mind would be preserved. A simulation would effectively be able to, with the promise of this type of technology, the technology would be able to effectively be him, and he could still be a philosopher. He could still be a scientist, and contribute to literature and be a very influential voice. But it would be a copy of him. It wouldn't be him, and that is the part that I'm grappling with, right? So like, and it might be vain. It's very vain, in fact. I would love to live forever, but like the idea of a copy of me being around, if it provides some sort of comfort to my loved ones after I've passed, like they can come and talk to the simulation of me, and if that's like a good coping mechanism, I think that's one thing. But I mean, for me personally, my selfishness is like, well, you are died. You die, and another copy is created, right? And then, so Brian in our Slack, he goes, "This seems like an okay retirement plan once this meat sack is officially useless." So,
100% agree. There you go.
But he also brings up the interesting point of uploading seems more like having a kid than being immortal. He says, sure, it'll be like you, but it's not you. And we're having this philosophical debate in our Slack. You can feel free to come and join us about this stuff. But I both love and hate this story because it forces us to think about what it truly means to upload our mind into a digital environment.
I think when you bring up Stephen Hawking, I think that even makes it more complicated, right? Because he's a perfect example of just a brilliant mind that's impacted the world so much when it comes to science, philosophy, just lots of different things, especially when we think about space and time. And there's a lot of what ifs in here, but this is very, very out there. But if you're able to preserve somebody's thoughts, and especially somebody with such intense intellect like Stephen Hawking, and keep that around and keep that moving, I think it can only end up benefiting people. And when we're talking about like brains that are hooked up to a server, and that just again reminds me of the beginning of kind of like a collective consciousness where you could potentially plug into it and start pulling things out. Or if there was ever a time where you needed to look into somebody's mind that had previously been alive and use some of their intellect to help you out or help out some situation in the world. Who knows?
My brain just exploded with the thought of having Stephen Hawking and Carl Sagan and Albert Einstein all in the same like digital environment, right? It's not them, but their brains are modeled and simulated. And so then these simulations can then talk to each other, and they can make potentially some of the greatest papers of all time. And it's these simulations of these wonderful minds that have graced our presence for such a short period of time on Earth, but their sort of their legend, their being immortal, sort of. Can we attribute a scientific paper, to these models and simulations of these wonderful minds? Like, it's blowing my mind right now thinking about all this through, because they can talk to each other 1,000,000 miles a minute in a virtual environment, in a simulated environment. They can run all these tests that they have going on in their head. They have access to millions of data points, databases online. And then I'm now convinced that this company is starting the AI revolution, because that, in effect, is a representation of artificial intelligence. Is it not?
I don't know, because they make the distinct point that this is not exactly you. And so does that mean that and again, like, I'll bring up the fact that we don't know that memories live in brain tissue and that you could stimulate them. So does this mean if I kind of embalm my brain, they put it in a simulation, is it actually able to access my thoughts, or is it accessing some version that's now a simulation that's completely different from me, that is using similar thought patterns that I used to have? I don't know. I couldn't even tell you. But the biggest, I think, impact this is going to have especially because there's people that are already on wait lists to do this, is going to open up and really let people see a lot more about what is going on in the brain.
Yeah, and that's ultimately for people like us, psychologists, who are interested in this type of thing, how we work. It's going to be really good. But I mean, we have to sacrifice a few people down along the way. But I mean, if they're signing up for it, then they're effectively contributing to science. So
most definitely.
All right, but before we move on, I just want to thank all of our friends over at Technology Review, New York Times, Wired, Bloomberg, and Newsweek. If you guys want to follow along, you can follow us all over social media for links to these original articles, and we even post some exclusives in our Slack, so be sure to do that. All right, Blake, let's get into our next and last story of the week.
Oh, this is so cool. All right, so prosthetics have come a long way over the last decade, increasing the amount of control through the wearer's thoughts. But today, even the most sophisticated prosthetics have no kinesthetic feedback or proprioceptive feedback. So meaning the only way to know where your prosthesis is at any time is to actually look at it or watch it. However, the Cleveland Clinic Medical Center is testing a new prosthetic bionic hand with a thermoplastic prosthetic sprocket. Wow, that's hard. That uses nerves that once commanded a person's hand and forearm now innervate to their biceps and tricep muscles. So the socket literally relays electrical signals from those muscles to a computerized motor-driven hand, which can be operated again by the wearer's mind. So, Nick, you and I have talked a bunch on the show about the leaps and bounds that prosthetics are making. I mean, a lot of it's centered around the idea that you can control them with your mind, which still just blows me away that that's even a possibility. Sometimes I don't even understand how that is a reality that we live in. But this is now kind of building upon that and trying to make sure that people can now almost function their bionic parts similar to the way they would just use their hand or anything like that. It's more of getting feedback to the existing nerves that you have, so that you know where your arm or limb exists in space without actually having to look at it.
Yeah, so this week on Philosophy Factors Cast, we are going to talk about what if you had access to this and the technology was better down the line. This ties in with our last story. I mean, if we could preserve a brain in a prosthetic body to where you could still move and feel everything, and just a brain transplant from the Altered Carbon series on Netflix. I haven't watched any of that, but I hear it's not that great. But that same concept is promising, right? And I'm wondering when we're going to, and this is a philosophical question, so don't think that I'm advocating for this in any way, shape, or form. But what happens when those prosthetics become better than what we're born with and equipped with at birth? Do we then opt for these prosthetics at birth? Are we then do we just change them out like parts? Do we keep the base? But then augment the arms and legs with additional things? Or do we even replace the heart for something that can beat more regularly, something that can handle more extreme conditions? That's my question, is when. I mean, it's wonderful for the people who have unfortunately lost their limbs in accidents or defects caused from a variety of different reasons, right? It's a wonderful thing that we're solving those problems. But I can imagine a world where we are looking at this technology and we're going, hey, that's better than what I have. And when are we going to cross that point?
Well, let's take what you said one step further. So let's imagine the instance where somebody's born with birth defects that might be fatal without specific parts. Well, now we're talking about now it's not even just can we replace the parts, but can we not only replace the parts, but replace them enough that they can actually have a normal life, or a life that they wouldn't have had otherwise at all. And so I think that gets into a strange conundrum too, because I do at some point believe we run into this, we're really trying to strive for immortality problem versus also trying just to give people a life in general. And when we're talking about like bionics, and I know this is very related to prosthesis, but I don't think it's going to stay like that forever. And I think that, Nick, I think what you're envisioning and your kind of thought experiment is going to be more of a reality than people are probably ready for in this day and age or state. And I'm not saying that by the time I'm 45 or 50 that I'll be running around in basically a bionic body. I don't think it'll happen that fast, but I do think it's a possibility. Or with the advances in, like, think about the advances of combining this bionics with stem cells that you could potentially grow nerves. Well, now let's connect it to your old brain that is running a simulation of your old self and give you a body. I mean, this is a lot of like weird, super hardcore sci-fi type stuff, but I don't think it's out of the realms of possibility with the advances in science we're making, from biology to prosthesis to any of that. I mean, it all feels possible.
Yeah, I didn't mean to get all philosophical on us today, man, but like so many of these stories just lend itself to that type of conversation, right? I mean, part of it is too, this story is very cool. I'm so happy that we are getting to that point where we can reach out and touch things with prosthetics and get that feedback. But I feel like there's a deeper conversation that we need to have about the way in which we interact with technology, and that's why we're going down these rabbit holes. For anyone who's listening and wondering, like, just talk about the story. We're tackling the bigger issues here, I think. Or I'd like to think, anyway. I don't know. What do you guys think? All right, Blake.
Come hang out in Slack and we'll talk about the story together.
Yeah, I think it's time for us to switch gears and get to It Came From Reddit. You want to talk about some Reddit stories?
Yes, please.
All right.
It came from Reddit.
That's right. This is the part of the show where we search all over Reddit to bring you topics the community is talking about. So any subreddit's fair game as long as it pertains to the field of human factors and encourages discussion amongst the community. It's fair game. All right, Blake, so it looks like we got time for maybe two, but let's pick the best one. So we got 1, 2, or 3. Let's see here. I don't quick programming note. I don't elevate these because I don't want somebody to go, oh, I wish you guys talked about that on the show. Isn't that smart? I don't know. Okay.
Yeah,
tooting my own horn here. All right, what do you think? We got 1, 2, or 3.
Honestly, Nick, I feel like the one that brings a lot of value to potential listeners, especially if it's human factors related people, it might be number 1, because this is something I didn't know off the top of my head could even be an issue.
Yeah, okay, let's go ahead and jump into it. So this one's titled, How Important is HFES Accreditation for a Master's Program? They go, this is written by, what is any of this? And they go on to write, since this is such a unique degree, I've not found much regarding accreditation importance. I've been looking at Embry-Riddle worldwide and campus, and can't decide if both degrees will be treated equally. Any help will be greatly appreciated. So, Blake, I will have to admit, when I was looking for schools, this was not something high on my radar. But what about you? Were you looking for an HFES accredited university when you were looking for a master's in human factors?
Nick, I will be bluntly honest with you. I did not know that was even a thing.
Yeah, so I know my school was definitely accredited by HFES, and I don't know. See, so I have. Was yours first off? Was yours accredited?
I'm looking right now. I'm assuming it was, but I don't want to say yes and be wrong.
Right. So I hope yours wasn't, because then we have two different points of view on this. Because it's very easy for someone to take the perspective of, you have it, and it's very easy to write it off like, I didn't need it. But I'd be curious, right? Like if you rose from a different cloth and you didn't have it, and sort of talk about our experiences and go at it from that route. But I mean, from the general consensus on this Reddit post, it doesn't look like it's super important. People are saying, it makes it a little bit easier. But I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure either. I mean, the only thing that I know for sure And again, I don't know if this is related or this is typically what all, campuses have, but we definitely had like student chapters of HFES on our campus. I mean, I was president of it at one point. I know that you can I know that the first time I ever came across, CSULB's master's program was through HFES. So I'm assuming it is accredited. I can't find anything on the website that is blatantly telling me it is. But it's a really interesting question, because I know when you think about getting just a bachelor's degree, or it was something I was concerned about getting a bachelor's degree, right? Like I wanted to make sure I went to a school that was accredited. So when I got out, at least my degree definitely counted for something. And I know some people or some friends of mine that went to schools that lost accreditation as they were, trying to graduate. So it was a big problem whether their degree was going to be recognized or not outside of school. I'm not sure in this case if it's something to be completely worried about, because I know a colleague of yours went to Embry-Riddle, and a good friend of mine that we've had on the show, Joe Ott, he has a human factors background from Embry-Riddle as well. So I'm pretty sure that his experience, it was accredited, but I think this is getting at what's going on in the worldwide campus, maybe something on the web versus physical in person in Florida.
That could be. Now, let me break this down one step further. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it absolutely doesn't matter one bit. And reason being is because if I were hiring a person and I were to look at their resume, it's not like, obviously some universities carry a little bit more clout than others, but honestly what I'm looking for is, who did you work with, what types of projects did you work on, and how eloquently can you speak about your role on those projects. Those are the main factors that I'm looking for when looking to hire somebody, right? And quick little plug, speaking of hiring, I created a little place on the Slack last week for job opportunities. So if you know of any opportunities or are hiring yourself, jump in the Slack, send a message to some of the people on there. It's a great way to make connections. And if you're also looking for a job, jump in there. You never know what you might find. So, but yeah, I mean, those are the things that I'm looking for. I'm not looking for an accreditation from this specific university. I'm going to go ahead and say definitively it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I feel like the only time you could ever run into a snag, and it is very, very unlikely, is getting your first job out of school.
Yeah.
If somebody happened to, we're talking about a master's program, you've done research, you can talk about your backgrounds. I would say that even if...
Let us know what you guys think of the stories this week. Did you like them? Did you hate them? Let us know if you have any sort of social media. Join the discussion on our Slack, like I said. You can find that link in our show notes or on gmail.com if you're one of those shy folks that doesn't want their comment being seen on the internet because employers look at that voicemails. Just do it. You can also support us on our Patreon at patreon.com/ or whatever your favorite podcast directory is. Wherever you can get podcasts for free, you can find us there. And if they want to talk about putting their brain in a vat and hooking up to electrodes,
at Don't Panic UX on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram.
As for me, I've been your host, Nick Roome. You can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter at Nick_Roome. Just let me know you're a fan of the show, and I'll be happy to add you. Thanks again for tuning in to Human Factors Cast this week. Until next time, it depends.
It depends.